Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast, also playing on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. And today we are kicking off our newest series on creating New Earth, a collaborative mission. And after all of the different guests that we've been pulling together, we really decided that we wanted to kick this off with Ralph Suddath. And if you haven't heard of Ralph, then you've been missing out. And I came across Ralph's work probably about a year and a half ago.
You guys are in for a treat.
Yeah, honestly, Ralph's work is, I honestly feel like he is like 100 years in the future as far as what he has been able to pull together. And he has this beautiful way of taking it from theory to actual practicality and making something that can actually make a difference in this world. So Ralph is the inventor of the Hydriva products. He's been involved in advanced studies of water, energy, and agricultural technology since 1989 and has developed a family of patented water treatment systems. He's combined the research of many noted scientists and inventors, especially Victor Schauberger, aiming always to apply natural principles to water treatment. While most researchers focus on theory, Ralph's expertise is in developing breakthrough products to address today's primary water problems. And he's going to be here today to talk to us about water, the difference between dead water, alive water, water memory. I mean, we're going to get into as much of it as we can from Ralph today, and who knows where else this conversation is going to go. But Ralph, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think this will be really fun. So why don't we start right from the beginning? I think it'd be really helpful for people to even understand a little bit of your journey as far as how did you even get into deep dive into water research? Where did this even stem from? I know you've mentioned before to us that you've kind of been like a health detective for yourself, but I'd love if you could share the story with everybody.
Maybe I'll just actually plug in the fact that for our listeners and our viewers, just as a word of caution, this episode might induce a whole lot of giddiness and joy and laughter, because that's kind of the nature of Ralph. I feel like the couple of conversations that we've had with him thus far is just, there's this sense of wonder and curiosity and enthusiasm that Ralph has that is so beautiful and also contagious. So Ralph, such a delight to be in your presence. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Okay, well, all right. I look forward to it. And I want to, I guess, water has been something I've been involved in, since when was that? When did I build my first water system? 93 or 94. So I guess almost 30 years ago. But the reason how the water system came about is, first of all, it started out because I had a terrible motorcycle accident when I was 20 years old. And I hit a car at 55 miles an hour, my motorcycle, no helmet. I was driving down the highway in California on Pacific Coast Highway. And this guy pulled out with a big old huge Cadillac, just crossed the, so I was staring at a car going 55 miles an hour. And I had to choose to either lay down my motorcycle and just sort of, hope for the best or hit it and, take off flying over the car as I've seen pictures. And so I chose to lay it down. So my leg went underneath the Cadillac and then I bounced back and I went inside. I was inside the car. Luckily I just hit the glass window. I was just fortunate to because if I would have hit any of the metal, I wouldn't be here today. Right. So I just smashed through the glass. So I'm inside the car and my leg and motorcycle are underneath the car. And so I just basically crushed my leg. Right. I mean, I crushed it 55 miles an hour in a big old Cadillac DeVille, a 1985 Cadillac DeVille. So and poor old man was driving. He just, just old and just didn't see me. Anyway, so I struggled for 4 or 5 years. They wanted to amputate it. I refused to get it amputated. It started turning purple. It was like 4 or 5 years later after the accident, I just slowly watched my leg deteriorate. And I was introduced, you just say there was a lot of magic that happened that I was able to find, miraculously, I was able to discover this medical device called the Acuscope Milepulse and the practitioners in California who were able to treat me. And within 3 days, I was running the beach, and my black purple leg was back to skin tone. And so, I mean, I was blown away by that. I was like, wait a minute, the doctors for years were telling me I had to cut my leg off. And here I was getting this treatment using sound frequencies and electrical, energy. And it's the same instrument that Joe Montana used to fix his broken back when he retired from football and then came back to play for Kansas City. I don't know if you remember that time period. But the ocuscope was what brought him back. And I go, Jackie Joyner Kersey. I mean, all the super athletes have been exposed to this amazing instrument that was developed in the 70s by a scientist named Tony Nabrinsky. And he was a NASA scientist. He discovered the technology to monitor the astronauts while they were in space. So he said, well, if I can communicate with astronauts, why can't I communicate with the human cell? Right. Mm-hmm. So he developed the Acuscope Milepulse while he was working with NASA. And so that introduced me to energy medicine. Right. But the fact that I was staring at losing my leg at 20, 23, 24, 20, I think by 25 years old, I was staring at leg amputation. And so I'm not a religious person, but man, I was praying to God, if you save my leg, I will dedicate my life to doing good and making my life a purpose and giving it purpose. And so when I magically got my leg cured, I mean, that was right after I made the pledge. So I just decided to make my life purposeful. And because I just got my leg saved, and I didn't know if it was from some power beyond, I didn't know, but I wasn't taking any chances. And so I made it. I started investing in scientists and inventors and doctors and anybody that had a purpose. I was supporting them, whether it be, walking their dogs or whatever I could do to help these men of science. Right. I just made it my mission to be a support. I wasn't smart enough to do anything else, so I started putting my energy toward, supporting these scientists that I was being introduced to. And fortunately, I had money at the time, so I was able to financially help these people that I thought were doing something. One guy had developed an incredible invention, which I thought would have certainly been here by now in the future, but it was like a Rife machine that was like a door, right? And when you walk through the door, all your viruses and diseases were killed, right? And so he was going to put them at the airports. So I forgot what money I gave him. But I thought, that's an incredible invention. What a futuristic device. So like you just walk through a doorway, but it was a light machine, but it was like a doorway. But when you walk through it, all the frequencies killed off whatever the main, diseases there were, right? And I gave him, I forgot how much, it's been 30 something years ago now, but I can't remember what check I wrote to him, but I thought this was a great invention for the world. And it wasn't about a month and a half later, he no longer answered his phone calls. We went by his place of business and they had yellow tape around it. And there was no entry. And it was like, and he disappeared. I was like, what happened to him? I was like, oh. And then, I was naive. I was 5 years in Southeast Asia, in the jungle. So I wasn't really, up to speed on the way the world really worked. Mm-hmm. And I was slowly being introduced to the fact that, that you can't just come out with technologies that are disruptive technologies. That there's a time and a place for that stuff. So I got to see really, and then another guy, he was working on patching the ozone layer. And so I was helping him. I said, how do you do that? I don't know if you remember back, there was a time when we were all worried about the ozone layer and its big opening. And so he was working on technology. So I funded him. And there were several scientists, but I eventually sort of kind of became interested in science, obviously, right? And I end up purchasing a company from a scientist who passed away, and he had a German science library of all of the secrets of German war, pre-World War II, all the scientists of that time, and all the interviews of those scientists by our scientists after the war, and so that just further indoctrinated to me about the incredible knowledge that we had, especially around the turn of the century, with all of this this incredible information. It was just an information explosion back then. This is the days of, pre Einstein, right? There was a incredible period during say 1890 to 1930. Incredible period of science at that point, right? That's really where humanity took a major turning point, right? We left our horse and buggy behind. We went into cars, and then we had created our industrial revolution, right? It was a magical time for science, and also for the pharmaceutical world, because they discovered, well, Germany and I think Rockefeller, they put together, they collaborated. But what they discovered was that they could synthesize natural plants, right? They could because they couldn't make any money off of plant medicine. So they figured out how to synthesize the mechanisms of the plants, and they could patent that. So that was the birth of the pharmaceutical industry, right? What's his name? Rockefeller and the German scientists, Germans again, right? Brilliant. And it could have been a wonderful thing. And it is in some respects still wonderful. But, they kind of, moved us away from the natural world into this pharmaceutical model and saying, no, you don't need the natural stuff. We have this synthetic stuff. It's better. It doesn't cure you like the natural stuff does, but it keeps you coming back for more. It's like, oh, okay. And so, the business model that they've put on us, it's like if we were plants, they're just like keeping us in the greenhouse, and then they're giving us whatever food or nutrients that they put in the tube to feed us, and by the way, that's creating a very deficient human being from a nutritional standpoint, and it keeps us sick, which keeps us again going back to the pharmaceutical industry for support. So that whole model to me is just, you can use the word evil, but it's stupid. Now, according to them, it's smart because it's a business model that you just can't deny. It's an incredible business model. But as a human being, as a man of, as a man of the world, and, seeing how the world works fundamentally, it's a terrible idea, because these chemicals don't go away. Even when people are taking these drugs and these medicines, they don't realize they're not going anywhere. They're going back into nature, mostly back into our water supplies, right? Because we urinate into the toilet. Well, those drugs are going away in the urinate. Then the toilet takes it to the wastewater plant. The wastewater plant dumps it usually back into the lakes or the rivers or whatever after they've filtered it, right? But it doesn't remove those signature chemicals, like the hormones and the birth control and the brain medications that everybody's on now. So all that stuff is being dumped back into our environment by the bajillions, right? And so this is why the memory of water is so critical, that nobody wants to talk about, because it's some kind of pseudoscience, which is so stupid. How can you say it's pseudoscience when it's evident that we are polluting our water with the very chemicals that we're supposedly being taking to save lives, right? Or to save our lives. And so it's a problem. So yeah, the memory of water to me became a very critical issue, along with agriculture and the deficiencies in our food supply, right, which is causing a lot of our problems. So I started figuring out, okay, I went into energy I went from developing a steam engine to a hydrogen power, to realizing that the world is not. We're not ready to move into the hydrogen economy, that we were still oil-based. We're still an oil-based economy, and you couldn't, you can't go faster than the world will allow. So I know in the future, hydrogen power will be, but the hydrogen economy is coming. It's inevitable. But at the time, it wasn't. They weren't allowing it, and people like Stan Myers. So Stan Myers was an incredible human being. As a Christian, he was the Tesla of our day. Can you imagine? We had a Tesla of our time. He didn't just develop the water engine. He had exotic technologies that would have transformed the world. We would be living in a different world, much like the way the Germans were thinking. I mean, Hitler was a bad guy, but there was a lot of incredible German scientists, based on the interviews that I read, that wanted this incredible world for us, because they had anti-gravity. They had free energy. They had these technologies. Now they kept them back because they knew it. Eventually they started figuring out Hitler was not the good guy that he, thought he was, and so immediately they started suppressing some of the technologies to keep him from the Third Reich and Hitler from exploiting that stuff in a negative way. But that's how he got everybody so pumped up. He promised this utopia, right? With where human beings would have this incredible life where they didn't have to worry about energy, housing, transportation. All this stuff was just going to be. It was going to be a magical world. Well, it didn't happen, right? I mean, with the world just wasn't ready. We weren't ready. Apparently, humanity wasn't ready, and we went on this different path. And which was oil-based economy and the pharmaceutical model and all these other things that were just profit driven. And so yeah, I love Stan Myers as he was an incredible mentor. But I took that knowledge that I got from him and my own research in water and seeing the magical properties of water. And then I began learning about Dr. Victor Schauberger, an Austrian scientist, and he taught me how to see water the way nature treats water, and the way water is in nature, and how nature purifies itself. What nature purifies water, and how it does it without any chemicals or any, all natural. And so I started understanding and learning more about the principles of the basic principles of water, and the understanding that water has memory. Well, the key for me was that, okay, water was not just this liquid material, right? It was not just this inert substance. It had magical properties. And even my grandfather, who was a scientist, I would always come to him with my experiments and share with him my research, and whether I was doing medical research or water research or whatever research, or agriculture research, I would always run it by him, because he was a scientist and a well-respected scientist. And so I told him, hey, Grandpa, this water is not just some simple substance after all. And he goes, yeah, it's not. He said, I can't remember when they decided to call it H2O, but it's because they didn't know what else to call it. They didn't have another name for it. It's the most mysterious substance in the universe as far as science is concerned. They don't understand it. They don't know what, it's just, there's so many molecular compounds that they can't, they just picked one, H2O, but there's a whole bunch of molecular compounds to water. And you got to remember, we're talking about, when you're talking about hydrogen, the two hydrogens and the oxygen, we're talking about something it's like 10,000 times smaller than a pinhead. So you can't even fathom that, right? We're talking about something so small. I forgot how many quadrillion molecules there are in a single drop of water. So it's like, what? So it's beyond us figuring it out. Can you imagine a quadrillion molecules in a single drop of water? So this stuff is so small. Nobody knows what's going on down there. Nobody knows. It's impossible to even speculate. So anyway, my grandfather gave me a clue. He says, you know what? Nobody knows. So that was the trigger for me. What do you mean nobody knows? All right. Well, then I'm going to become the explorer. I decided that's what I'm young and stupid. So I was like, this is a chance for me to dive into something that nobody knows about. And then I get to come back and tell people what I learned. And I was fully on board. I had a cool laboratory. I had engineers working for me. And so I built all these different water systems. We built water that spin left. We built water that spin right. We put antennas down the center of the vortex. We put antennas at the apex. We put antennas to this. We were just seeing what water did and how it expressed itself after We tried to manipulate it with magnets, electricity, sound. I just did every possible experiment that I could think of, really. And I developed my first electronic sterilizer in 1996, I believe, 1996. It had issues because of I was using the wrong kinds of metal, and they were releasing metal ions, which I didn't really need, but the electrolysis or the ionization of the metal caused these metals to release. So, but I was onto something, because even if I filtered those metals out, the water still stayed sterile, but it wasn't sterile in the normal way. What the scientists at Harvard and MIT discovered, testing my methods and my water tests, they said, "Hey, disease isn't growing in your water." But he says, "But you're not killing anything. It's just that they don't want to replicate." And I said, "What does that mean?" Is, "I don't know, because there's no chemicals in the water to cause this. It's just water." So that was the first time they saw that was just water and no disease or no bacteria could grow in it. And so then I had to go back to Victor Schauberger. So it turns out that's how nature purifies. You know how nature purifies itself? It's the vortexes. Those vortices are actually the breathing mechanism of water. When the vortices happens, it actually sucks in the ether, which, by the way, the same ether we breathe in that keeps us alive. So the water is breathing in this ether via the vortex. And when that does, it actually charges these tiny little molecules, right? All these little molecules. But when you do that, here's what happens. The energy of that water changes dramatically. And it turns out disease is driven by this vibrational frequency, right? So when you have a high frequency, disease doesn't belong there. Nature's not stupid. They know where they belong. So disease goes when the vibration is low. That's where they break everything down so that life can turn over, right? That's the cycle of life. But when the energy is high, no disease can live. It's not meant to. You can put disease in that water and it won't do anything, because it's not its vibrational environmental frequency to allow it to grow, right? It doesn't belong there, and it knows it doesn't belong there. That's what's cool about microbes. They know their position, and they're driven by the frequency of the environment. Pasteur tried to push this narrative that the bacteria was the problem, that we got to fight these bacteria, which really drove the whole pharmaceutical industry. But there was a guy, I can't think of his name now. I wrote an article on it. Deschamps, right? Yeah, right. And there was a couple of other scientists that said, no, it's not the bacteria, it's the environment. And he pushed because the pharmaceutical industry was backing Pasteur, and nobody was backing Deschamps, but even though he was the smartest one in the room, because he knew the truth. And the truth was the environment drives these microbes, right? That's like blaming the firemen in the fire truck because they're right there where the fire is. It's like, hey, these are the enemies. No, they're there to put out the fire. Well, the microbes are there to do whatever they're doing at that frequency, right? Because that's their job. So we're interfering with nature because we don't understand it. But if we learned that disease is vibrational, it's a frequency. It's and then you go, okay, well, if disease is vibrational, it's at a frequency. Well, how can we change the frequency? How can we alter that and raise the frequency so we're not in that disease state? Well, okay, so then you go, what is frequency? That word is thrown around so much. I almost hate that, some of the descriptions that people use, because it's simple. When people make it to where only they understand it, I have a problem. So I'm going to tell you the third grade, let's just say the third grade level. Okay. On a third grade level, frequency is geometry. It's shape. That's all it is. Frequency is shape. It's patterns. And what happens is patterns trap light. and that creates frequency. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Anybody else that wants to make it complicated, well, they can if they want, because they, it helps their egos to become, smarter than everyone else. But it's not. It's simple. It's as simple as geometry. Frequency is geometry. We say, well, frequent. How does frequency frequent? It's because the geometry puts out a vibrational light pattern, right, or an energy pattern, based on its geometry. So it's the frequency of that pattern, whether it vibrates at 528 hertz or 432 hertz. But it's the geometry that determines that, right? So geometry is tied to frequency. And what more importantly is, why is geometry so important? Is because if geometry traps light, that creates vibration, obviously, right? And I learned this with my research with Dr. My really good friend. He wrote the books on water, Dr. Emoto.
Hidden Messages in Water.
Yeah, the hidden messages of water. But, we got together right after 9/11. And I took over a bunch of my water systems to Japan. And I just wanted to see what water liked, because I was getting way off. I was going way off, the deep end. I was doing all kinds of crazy experiments with water. And then when I read about Dr. Emoto, I wanted to know, okay, well, what does water say about what I'm doing, right? And so I found out water didn't really like direct electricity. It really created this really almost like, I don't know, nightmarish sort of pattern. It wasn't good. Strong magnetic fields, it seemed to warp the crystal. So I started seeing that water was subtle. Water's a subtle energy substance. And the more I learned about it, was that water is kind of like this alien, sort of extraterrestrial type being. It's got some consciousness, because we were placing words on it, and it was giving us that pattern expression right back. It was basically talking to us. And everybody says, "Oh, you're crazy." Yeah, well, yeah, maybe I am, but I saw what I saw. And I got to see a lot of cool experiments while I was with Dr. Emoto. He and I both, and I traveled the world and took water samples and saw the, whether it be water coming from a toxic lake where it was, a lot of toxins were being released into the lake, and it was basically toxic. And we got to see what that water looked. Then we got to see what natural springs water looked like. And so the only thing that was common among these water experiments was that natural water has this beautiful crystalline structure. And what does that mean? Because then I went, okay, well, what happens if I play one frequency to water? Well, it made one geometric pattern. It made one geometric sign. Okay, well, so what if I put two frequencies to it? Well, then all of a sudden I had a layer. I had one frequency, and then I had another layer and another pattern on top of that. I said, okay, well, now let's do Bach. Okay, well, then we did Bach and Beethoven. Well, that's when I started seeing all of these patterns started laying on top of each other, creating this beautiful geometric pattern, which is what? Vibration, which is what? Frequency. Okay, so then I went, oh, okay, so nature has sounds, right? And the other thing that made water create geometry was the vortex. Then I just did a single vortex. I took water, and we just did a single vortex. And it's amazing how when water gets a breath of air, I guess I like to think that with the vortex is the breathing mechanism of water, right? Of this alien. And so when it breathes in the ether, beautiful, not an incredible pattern, but a pattern. It goes from an unorganized pattern to an organized pattern, which I found fascinating, just via the vortex. It's not a beautiful crystal. You can tell it's kind of like it's like a baby crystal. Like, okay, there's some crystal structure there. You can see the patterns kind of trying to form. But what happens is we call it mature water and immature water, right? Immature water is water that has no story, right? It hasn't gone down the mountain, through the streams, down the, into the rivers and, into the ponds. It hasn't had that life experience. But when it has that life experience, there's this beautiful crystal. These beautiful crystals were showing up. And I was like, it's almost like ancient. It's just, you could just tell, like, wow, this water has been somewhere, right? And And then I went, okay, well, if we play Bach and Beethoven and all the beautiful music that we were able to play to water and see the crystalline structure that was formed. And then I saw in nature similar but not the same thing. Like they did prayers like thanks and gratitude. And it didn't matter if it was in German, if it was in Spanish, if it was in Japanese, if it was in English, the pattern was the same.
Oh, cool.
And then if you had then you had, okay, thanks and gratitude, then we had love and joy. Okay, it had its own kind of pattern. It was different, but this again, the same thing. If it was in German or in Arabic, it didn't matter. It was still the same family. Okay, because we took 50 photographs, so there was it's just like we picked the best slides, but they were all, you could tell, were the same family. And so yeah, they always said Emoto cherry picked Dr. Emoto cherry picked the photographs. Well, he did and he didn't. Those were just the best pictures. It's like, I mean, if you're going to a class, when you're going to get your pictures taken at at the class school pictures, you're not going to pick the worst picture. You're going to pick the best picture because that's the expression. So I got to see the real science when he was being attacked as pseudoscience. Turns out that was complete nonsense. He was absolute science. I took the photographs myself and got to see exactly what was going on. And so it was fascinating to see the importance of geometry to water. But then I learned something more. I went even further, and I saw that when you have water that's stagnant, which is most of our water now, whether it be sitting in our giant these tanks, our water tanks, or city municipal water treatment plants, it's stagnant. It's not moving. It's not flowing. It's sitting in a cement pool or a big giant tank, and it's stagnant. Well, what happens because water's nature is moving. Water's movement. For thousands of years, human beings drank water that was moving. And so the energetic properties of water is why, people didn't get sick when they were drinking moving water, because moving water is energetic. And it has, and so what happens when we modernized the world and we just forgot about the natural principles, we started putting water under these stagnant conditions. Well, we created these disease states, which did what? Well, it forced us to go through Pasteur's philosophy, where it's the bacteria is our enemy. Bacteria is the enemy, and so we gave the water antibiotics, which is chlorine. Chlorine is an antibiotic, and so we killed the bacteria using chlorine for over 130, 40 years, 50 years now, whatever it's been. We've been using chlorine, right? Now, chlorine has been great. It's probably saved millions of lives over the 100+ years. But there's some ignorance involved in that decision. Is that we didn't even pursue the fact that, hey, but how do we make water where no disease can live? How can we mimic nature and make water energetic so that it doesn't grow bacteria? It doesn't grow bad bacteria. Because again, bad bacteria is a frequency environmentally based organism. When that frequency drops below the natural threshold, disease thrives. And which is why we had to use chlorine. They didn't know, because they were ignorant. I won't say stupid. They were ignorant. They didn't know any better. And it solved the problem. But then what happened was we started learning that all these organic materials, when you have organic materials in water and you combine chlorine, well, you create these trihalomethanes and all of these super toxins. And the research came out, I want to say right around, I don't know, the late 90s. The EPA scientists were warning the U.S. government and other governments, hey, we got to get off of chlorine. We're creating super toxins in our water, and we don't know what the alternative is. And so there was a big push back then to go alternative like ozone, right? So ozone was popular for a minute, because what they discovered was ozone created new chemistry. Because when you oxidize water, you create new oxide chemistry. So we're having all these this new chemistry with the end of the chemistry with oxides, whether it be, I can't remember all the oxide poisons there were, but ozone was really, it was like, oh my God, we got an alternative. Ozone was going to be the savior. And then it wasn't very long before they figured out ozone was not the savior. And more importantly, it didn't last. You couldn't ozonate water and put it in storage and then it stayed ozonated, right? The gas escaped. And so it wasn't efficient. It has its purpose, still has a place in water treatment, but it wasn't made for municipal water. It just wasn't designed for it because of those organics. When you oxidize that water with those organics, it made these new oxide chemicals. And so it was thrown out. And then they tried a couple of other, UV, and they kept coming up. And then they came up, they decided, you know what? We don't have another alternative. So y'all just need to shut up about chlorine. So they put a gag order on the EPA. And I knew these guys. These were the scientists that I was hanging out with, because I was young and adventurous. And I was, taking my water systems everywhere. All over, EPA scientists, all the water treatment labs. I was going everywhere. I did demonstrations, with senators and congressmen in Florida and water treatment plants. I mean, I made an effort to try to change the way we treat water in this country and around the world, really, by showing them another way to treat water. And what we found out is, look, they got federal laws mandating that we use chlorine. So I'd have to go in and change the laws. So my system that eliminated the need for chlorine was not valid because the federal laws prohibited water treatment systems from not using chlorine. In other words, you had to have a certain percentage of chlorine in the water. They just decided, and the chemical industry wasn't going to have an alternative to their money stream, right? Even though I proved it I think I forgot what was the town. It was the oldest city in Florida. I can't think of the name of it. It's so long ago. But anyway, I proved it, and they said you eliminated 3/4 of our water treatment plant with your device. And I go, well, because it's a water clarifier, it's a water sterilizer. It just does everything that they're dumping all these chemicals in to do. But the problem was, and he said this, look, if you can get the laws changed, we'll be happy to use your system. And so I was like, well, what does that take? Well, a couple $100 million just to get started, but you're probably still going to lose. And I go, well, okay, well, I got, $74 in my pocket and a couple thousand in the bank. So I was like, I'm real short. So I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything about changing the laws, which was sad because I had a congressman and a senator and people, famous people behind me, Al Gore, a bunch of people were trying to support it, but it just wasn't, just wasn't time. I guess that's what they kind of said. I'm too early. That the world's not ready for this type of technology, and so I put it on the side, and I said, okay, all right. Well, let me go to agriculture then. If I can't treat water, so I did. I traveled the world. I'm France, South America, Asia, and I started showing people how to use water in agriculture that stimulated microbes. So it turns out this is the problem, that chlorinated water, even if it's not chlorinated, even they filter the chlorine out, okay, it still has the chemical memory. So what happens is we're drinking this water. By the way, I hate to tell everybody this, but we're 50% by weight microorganisms, and our microbiome is responsible for our brain health, our immune system. I mean, so many things. We're just now beginning to understand the importance of the microbiome. So I designed my water system that supported those guys, but I also saw it was the same microbiome in the soil. I mean, we act like we're so different from the earth, like we're just aliens, and this is Fort Lauderdale, and we all just are having a great time, and just making a mess, and then we die, and it's like we leave the mess for the maid or whoever else comes behind us to clean up. Terrible attitudes human beings have. And so I just decided that I was going to play a role where if I could show that, the cheapest thing you can do is to alter your water. And if you altered your water, that makes up 70% of the planet, 70% of us. And it's responsible for 50% of our illnesses, at least. And I'm being very conservative. Because why? Because if the water frequency drops below the natural threshold, disease thrives. So how important is it to keep our water frequency up, right? And nobody's drinking good water because it's dead. You notice nobody likes water. Very few people drink water. It's I would say on an average 1% of the population drink water. Really, it's not good. And it's because it's just not inviting. But if you energize water, your body craves it. Your body's like, give me some more of that. And it'll keep drinking till you're bloated, because it's like, this is real water. So nature showed me that, that the way to really help humanity and the environment was to change the way we treated our water. And so I've just made it my mission, and I went all in on water. And I developed water systems for agriculture. I made water systems for pools and jacuzzis, and water systems for food manufacturing industries like Bilbo, the people that make breads and things, right? I said, so I could, anywhere that I could, because I knew how to make a high vibrational water. And so that transfers into to the foods and the products, right? But also if you're drinking it, it transfers into the body. And we know that it's incredible, because we did the experiments to show only healthy microbes grow in this high vibrational water. Beneficial microbes. We're not going to get around microbes. Microbes are our friends, but microbes have a law. It's a vibrational law. When the vibration drops, then there's a disease microbe, which is part of the life cycle, that he's going to be there. He's coming. Vibration drops. I don't know exactly his full function, but when you drop the water, a vibration of water, disease is bound to set in. But when you raise the vibration, disease dies off very quick. In fact, they stop growing, and then the new guys, the balance of nature changes to the good guys. So I thought, this is a very important discovery. It's like, this is simple. This is third grade. It's like, why don't we teach this simple stuff? It's like, because it sounds kind of, I don't know. And I'm like, well, I don't know. The truth doesn't ring. Okay. All right. Well, it does to me. It does. It rings to me. So I'm going to just stay in this weird little cult that I got around me, that I convince people that, hey, water's an energy based substance, that you can have a low energy, or you can have a high energy. But there can put too much energy in water. I found that I can put too much energy in water, and that's not balanced. So I said, oh shoot, because the game became, okay, well, if I put the energy in water, what happens if I put a lot of energy in water? Well, then it goes out of balance. And so I had to find this balance. And then I used the microbes to tell me. The microbes told me what was the balance, because I could see their growth. Like I did certain waters that were high energy, and the microbes would accelerate their growth, and then they would spike and die. So it was like I put a bunch of coffee in the water, and they all had a incredible time, and then they all died the next morning. So it was too much energy. And so I had to find that sweet spot. So that's when I developed the Hydriva system for people to benefit from energizing their own water, right? And so that system's, I've sold for over 25 years, and they've done really well. Serviced, I mean, it's 25-year-old systems are still working today, so they do wonderful. And then you could also do where if you pour water through it several times, it can become medicinal. So you could use it on wounds or sunburn or certain issues that you might need a more concentrated water, energized water. So it has medicinal properties if you know how to manipulate it. So yeah, that water was fascinating to me, and I spent a great deal of time in water. But then I started figuring out everything's water. Everything's water. Plants are water, humans are water, animals are water, nature's in water. And there's a whole lot of water even in our atmosphere. You got you've seen those machines sucking water out of the air. So air and water are cousins. So I started seeing, commonalities, right? And so I changed my thinking. Okay, well, what is going on with the body electric and water? Because my grandfather told me that that there was no such thing as the fountain of youth, that genetics are the cause of our death, that we have gene codes that allow us to live a certain age, and those codes can't be changed. Those codes are real. The only thing we can do, we can maybe improve our lives by a few years, or we could reduce our lifespan by bad choices and a bad lifestyle or whatever. But those codes are there, and they're permanent, and they're genetic, and you can't change them. And so he told me, don't even bother with the fountain of youth. And I said, well, Grandpa, I said, yeah, but there's scientists out there that are saying that it's theoretically possible. Well, it turns out my grandfather was right. We do age. There's no such thing as anti-aging. There's slowing down the aging process. And I started learning, and I learned from a number of scientists about what really goes down, what goes on behind aging, what's really behind aging. What is aging really? Aging is cell division. And then you go, okay, well, if aging is cell division and there's so many cell divisions and we die, okay, well, what happens before the cell divides? Where do we go there? What's going on there right before the cell divides? Well, the cell divides when the DNA strand begins to unwind. Okay, the DNA strand in the cell begins to unwind. That signals the cell to divide. Okay, and when the cells divide, okay, well, that just tick, that just your aging begins, right? That's aging. Tick, tick, and you only have so many cell divisions and you're out, right? So I go, okay, wait a minute. So what causes the DNA to start to unwind? Let's go there. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. But let's just say, okay, well, how do we keep the DNA strand from unwinding? Well, cool research went on around that. You're right. There's a lot of cool DNA scientists that were working on that. Guess what keeps the DNA strand from unwinding? Cool, what they call biofrequencies. Biofrequencies keep the DNA. When we played certain sound, like 528 was famous, 432 was famous. There's only a few frequencies that I got to see the research on, but these DNA strands begin to tighten up with these sound frequencies. Well, guess what that does? Slows down the aging process.
This concludes part 1 of this fascinating interview on water. Please make sure to join us next week as we continue on with the brilliant Ralph Suddath for part 2.